So the last segment of this webinar or this CME is I'll be covering the eyelid and the adnexal trauma. So the primary goal of a wound care is not the technical repair of the injuries caused, but providing an optimal condition for the natural reparative process of the wound to occur and proceed. So my outline of the presentation would be the basic principles of eyelid trauma, margin involving and margin sparing, canalicles involving canthal avulsions, chemical burns, dog bite, and foreign body. So what I would do is, in the interest of time, I would skip the chemical burns, dog bite, and foreign body part, as this would be too exhaustive. So before we begin to the actually going on to the management of trauma, these are the certain landmarks that you must be aware of to know that what you need to the normal anatomical landmarks. So the upper eyelid crease, the lacrimal puncta, medial canthus, the nasofacial sulcus, the nasojugal crease, the lower eyelid crease, malar fold, limbus, intraorbital crease. Okay, and this is the orientation of the orbicularis muscle, the lacrimal gland, medial canthal tendon, lateral canthal tendon, tarsal plate. So again, this is the normal anatomy. So these are the layers of the eyelid, skin, orbicularis oculi muscle, the orbital septum, the inferior tarsus muscle covered by the capsulopalpebral fascia, the gray line, meibomian glands, and the conjunctiva. Posterior most layer is the conjunctiva. So these are the tension lines. Then again, you must be aware of the nerve supply. So the supraorbital nerve, supratrochlear nerve supply the superior aspect. The infratrochlear nerve again. So these supraorbital nerve, supratrochlear, and the intratrochlear nerve supply the superior aspect. The infraorbital nerve is supplying the inferior, the middle inferior part. Zygomaticofacial nerve and the zygomaticotemporal nerve supply the lateral aspect. Then going on to the arterial supply, this I would just skip through this, but you must be aware of this. So Dr. Sonal has already covered the basics of a trauma management. I will not go into the detail of this. So the various kind of eyelid injuries that one could encounter can be either a hematoma, a contusion, an abrasion, a crush injury, puncture wound, an avulsion, or a laceration. So whenever you're looking at eyelid trauma, always try to classify it as superficial or deep, simple or complex, marginal or extramarginal if it's involving the canalicles and the canthal involvement. So in case of a simple laceration, this can be repaired under local anesthesia or general anesthesia. Look, if it's a child, then you would need a general anesthesia. You should try to repair it within 12 to 24 hours. Prophylactic antibiotic as and when needed. An adequate lavage and foreign body removal should be done. The lacerations which are perpendicular to the orbicularis, you should place deep muscular sutures to approximate the wound edges without tension on closure. And interrupted sutures placed in excessive by. I'm really sorry, my fonts are all disarranged. I'll just keep, or if you could just give me 1 more minute, I'll just share my presentation again. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do so.
Yeah, it's all.
I think it was visible clearly, so you can go on.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah. Yeah. So, fine. So this is a pre-op and a post-operative picture of repair done. So in case of complex lacerations, so you should perform it under general anesthesia, and you should avoid unnecessary debridement. try to repair the deeper tissue injuries like the LPS, that is the levator palpebrae superioris, tarsus, the medial canthal tendon and the lateral canthal tendon. Try to align the identifiable suture, the surface marks as much as possible. Complete the deep interrupted closure, then do a skin closure and appropriate post-operative wound care and medication. Also, in such case of injuries, what care one must take is to thoroughly lavage the wound with betadine and look out for any foreign bodies before you actually start the closure. So this is a pre-op and the post-op picture of the repair done. Now coming to the marginal tears, the eyelid tears involving the margin. So the lid margin should be repaired with a vertical mattress suture using a 6-0 vicryl suture. Okay, the posterior tarsal should be with an interrupted 6-0 vicryl suture. Then you suture the lash line with a 6-0 vicryl suture. And then anterior lamella, that is your skin, is sutured with interrupted sutures. So this is the long 3-step closure of the marginal lid suture, which I've already explained. So canalicular tears, they can result from a deceptively small eyelid or conjunctival laceration, sometimes without the involvement of lid margins. And failure to diagnose can lead to a lifelong tearing. So specifically, what we used to very commonly encounter canalicular tears was with a hook injury to a child while the mother was breastfeeding the child. So if you come across with such an injury, then be assured that it is involving the canaliculus. The medial canthal area lacerations, they require a nasolacrimal duct probing and irrigation to confirm if there is any sort of canalicular tear. And it has better outcomes if it is repaired in the OR setup in less than 48 to 72 hours. So how do you identify the cut ends of the canaliculus? A white or pink mucosal, you will see a circular mark. It is more difficult if there is a lid edema. So you can use a loop or you can visualize it under the microscope. So so this needs a stenting. So pass the stent to the canaliculus. So then you identify the punctum, the proximal cut, identify the distal cut, and then you suture it. You pass a stent down the nasolacrimal duct, and pericanalicular tissue is then sutured with placement, and you suture the skin defect. And appropriate post-operative wound care and medication is needed. So this is a pre-operative. As you can see, there is a small canalicular tear, and this is the repair done. Technical glitches. So the various stents that can be used for repairing a canalicular tear could be a mini Menoka stent, it could be a monocanalicular annular stent, a bicanalicular stent placement, or a bicanalicular annular stent. First you need to pass the probe and identify the distal and the proximal cut ends, then pass the mini Menoka stent, and then suture as described. So canalicular tear, there are certain myths associated that the laceration involving the upper canalicular system need not be repaired since they do not play an active role in drainage of tears. But it's a fact that in certain people, the upper canalicular system is the more dominant tear drainage system. Hence, it needs to be repaired. Now, if there's an injury to the medial canthal tendon, so the horizontal traction on the eyelid will cause avulsion at the weakest points, which are the medial or the lateral canthal tendon. The medial avulsion warrants evaluation of lacrimal drainage system, as I've already described. And the sign of a medial canthal tendon injury would be telecanthus and rounding of the medial canthal tendon. And treatment will depend on the nature of avulsion. If it's only the upper or the lower limb which is avulsed, it can be sutured to its stump or periosteum over the overlying the anterior periosteum. So when the entire tendon is avulsed, it is treated by reattachment to posterior lacrimal crest. If it is associated with nasoorbital fracture, transnasal wiring or plating is needed after reduction of the fracture. In case of this is the lateral canthal avulsion, lateral canthal tendon avulsion. So lateral canthal tendon has to be reattached to the lateral orbital rim using non-absorbable Prolene sutures. The sharp contour of lateral canthal tendon angle has to be kept in mind while reconstruction. The avulsion injuries accompanied by tissue loss need reconstructive surgery at a later date. The initial goal is to restabilize the eyelid and protect the globe. Tarsography can also be considered meanwhile. So certain the specific pointers for other wound injuries. So scalp injuries, they bleed profusely. Shaving increases the risk of infection, hence trimming of the hair is advised. Disruption of galea is to be repaired if it is noted. As the subaponeurotic galeal tissue contains emissary veins, which can lead to an intracranial spread. Face is a highly vascular part of the face, and the part, and it has high vascularity and low incidence of infection, and you should debride minimal to preserve the normal facial landmarks. Forehead is unrepaired muscle layers are likely to produce scars. So you should be liberal with deeper sutures in the wounds rather than tension. Reapproximate skin tension lines and hairline precisely. In case of an eyebrow injury, one should do minimal debridement and the scalpel should be angled parallel to the direction of hair shafts to reduce the hair follicle damage. So the various late complications that can occur with a eyelid tear repair can be, there could be a lid misalignment, lid margin notching. If the basic principles are not followed, then these are the following things that can occur. There could be a hypertrophic scarring, there could be positional anomalies like ectropy or entropy on ptosis, lag of thalamus, and there could be a delayed infection. So it is important to cover these, have a post-operative systemic antibiotic coverage to avoid the infection. So I am skipping the dog bite injuries and the chemical injuries. A quick, I'll just cover quickly the orbital blowout fractures. So the orbit is in the form of a pyramid, which has a quadrilateral base and a triangular apex. It has thick rim and thin walls. The floor is the shortest wall followed by the medial wall. So the orbital blowout fractures can be divided as pure orbital blowout fractures and impure orbital blowout fractures. The pure orbital blowout fractures are used to describe the fracture of the orbital floor, medial orbital wall, or both with an intact bony orbital margin. The impure orbital blowout fractures are the one when these fractures occur in conjunction with the fracture of the orbital rim. For example, a part of a zygomatic complex fracture. So the most common site for a blowout fracture to occur is the posteromedial aspect of the orbital floor. You can see this one because this is the thinnest part, okay, which is medial to the intraorbital neurovascular bundle, where the maxillary bone is very thin. The lamina papracia, which is the medial orbital wall, is also very prone to fracture. So this is either in isolation or in association with a fracture of the orbital floor or other facial bones. So the two mechanisms which are thought to be responsible for pure orbital fracture are whenever there is an injury like a fist injury, which is greater than the diameter of the orbit, there's a backward displacement of the globe, which is caused by, as I mentioned, a non-penetrating object like a tennis ball. It raises the intraorbital pressure sufficiently to fracture the posteromedial orbital floor, because that is the aspect where the orbit is weakest, and or the lamina papracia of the ethmoid. Or the other proposed mechanism is a transient deformation of the orbital rim transmits the force of injury directly to the orbital wall. So these fractures, as mentioned, they tend to occur following any blunt trauma to the periorbital region, like a blowout, like a blow with a fist. So the weak areas of the orbital wall, they provide some means of protection to the globe and the orbital tissue. So whenever there's an injury, these will expand into the maxillary antrum or the ethmoid sinus rather than being compressed against the more rigid areas of the orbit. The periorbita overlying the fracture is usually ruptured following the adjacent orbital fracture prolapse into the fracture site. Occasionally, part of an adjacent extraocular muscle will also be prolapsed into the fracture site. So That is why we commonly see that the inferior rectus muscle and the inferior fat prolapse into the maxillary sinus, as we had already also seen one in one of the CT scans in the previous presentation. So the clinical features that would be there in a case of orbital fracture, there would be a periorbital ecchymosis, restriction of movements, vertical diplopia, hypotropia, intraorbital anesthesia, depression of the globe, enophthalmos. There could also be a proptosis, periorbital edema, hematoma, or cranial nerve injury. So specifically, whenever you are doing your examination and whenever you're doing your examination with a patient of orbital trauma, you have to look out for these things. You have to measure the enophthalmos with a Hertels. You need to mention all these points, that there is no diplopia, there is no limitation of movement, no infraorbital anesthesia, no hypotropia. So these things will, so we can say that clinically it's not suggestive of a fracture. Okay. Subcutaneous emphysema can also be one of the clinical features that also needs to be mentioned, even if it's not there in your negative history, because it also becomes sort of medical legal. So yeah. So as I said, that in case of a suspected orbital fracture, you need to do a detailed clinical examination, do a force suction test, X-ray, but CT scan with axial and coronal cuts with 2 mm cuts, as I've already described, is the gold standard. Do a Hertels exophthalmometry for 2 mm of enophthalmos. And in case you feel that there is diplopia, limitation of movement, do a HVF later on. So one thing which also needs to be specified is the difference between an adult and a pediatric orbital fracture. So the pediatric bones are very flexible. So it is sort of a trapdoor fracture, because of which there is a inferior rectus entrapment. The trapdoor recoils, and because of this stimulates the trigeminal nerve, leading to oculocardiac reflex. So in these children, it may be seen that it is actually a wide-eyed fracture. You may not have any apparent clinical signs, but if you are noticing that there is a limitation of the elevation, you suspect an inferior rectus incarceration, you do a CT scan, and it's one of the indications for early repair of the fracture. So, so we all know that orbital fracture is not, there is a lot of soft tissue edema associated. So you would wait for the edema to first subside before going in for the surgical repair, because that would give you a correct assessment of how much needs to be repaired and what is the situation. But there are certain specific conditions where you have to do the urgent repair, which would be enophthalmos more than 2 millimeter. In case there's any muscle entrapment, a trapdoor entrapment, or the floor fracture involving more than 50% of the floor. So thank you. I've tried to just give a very overview of the eyelid, adnexal, and the orbital fracture injuries, which should help you with practical pointers when you are seeing a patient in the